We're back visiting with Douglas Feith, the former Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, the number 3 position in the Defense Department during the George W. Bush administration. At an epic moment, by the way, chronicled in his masterful memoirs entitled War and Decision, Inside the Pentagon at the Dawn of the War on Terrorism. Doug, we were talking a bit about there being really an alternative approach to dealing with a hostile power like the Iranians in the fashion that the Obama administration has done, what you call a collaborative diplomacy or cooperative diplomacy. In the case of disarming Libya of its nuclear weapons program, your team was highly successful in applying this other approach, the coercive diplomacy, as you call it. Just remind us of both the difference in approach and the difference in outcome.
Well, the George W. Bush administration made it clear that we were focused on the particular dangers that came from regimes that both supported terrorism and pursued weapons of mass destruction. Because after 9/11, which created a new era in international affairs, there was an appreciation of how dangerous weapons of mass destruction in the hands of terrorist groups would be. And so the President Bush focused the world's attention with his Axis of Evil speech on the idea that there are countries that both pursue WMD and support terrorism and could become sources of WMD for terrorist groups. So that was a major theme. And having made that point, President Bush then decided to overthrow the government of Afghanistan and then to overthrow the government of Iraq. And immediately after the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, or soon thereafter, the United States intercepted a shipment of nuclear weapons-related material that was going to Libya. And we intercepted it on a ship in the Mediterranean, and it highlighted the Libyan nuclear weapons program. And when that interception occurred, the Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi panicked and realized that he may suffer the fate of the leaders of Afghanistan and Iraq. And in his panic, he decided that he was going to change Libya's policy on WMD and give up his program. And so he invited the British and the Americans in and told us what he had in the way of WMD production capability and facilities and material, and told us much more than we knew. I mean, this wasn't like dealing with the Iranians now, where we have to pull teeth to get information, and they give us dishonest information, and they drag us out. I mean, Gaddafi had obviously come to the decision. I mean, he felt coerced by circumstances. He came to the decision that he wanted out of that business. And so he completely openly revealed information, invited American and British experts in, and told us a lot more than we knew. I mean, it wasn't, as I said, a matter of grilling him and trying to extract pieces of information. He just opened up the books, as it were. And we dismantled his chemical and nuclear programs. And that was a really a high watermark in international non-proliferation efforts. And it's an example of how a regime of that kind can be coerced by its concern of what the consequences are, by the consequences of its pursuing weapons of mass destruction programs that we consider to be unacceptable and extremely dangerous.
Let me just ask, Doug Feith, because you not only served, as I've mentioned, in the George W. Bush administration at the highest levels of government, Back in the day when we were young men in the Reagan administration, you were responsible for negotiations policy as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. And in the course of what we've been watching here, and specifically the contrast between coercive diplomacy as successfully practiced in Libya by the Bush administration, we've witnessed a totally different approach. Again, you've suggested it was naive. It really seems as though it was hapless and almost pathetic, certainly humiliating, the way John Kerry and the Obama team, and for that matter, it must be said, the other members of this negotiation, to the extent that they played a role in shaping its final outcome, was absolutely at odds with this approach. It was pleading, not coercive. It was capitulating, not demanding. Give us a flavor, as you see it, with a broad brush of history as the background here, how this negotiations practice, tradecraft, performed and gave rise to this particular result.
I don't think that the problem that President Obama and Secretary Kerry had with the Iranians resulted from their inability to negotiate in a tough fashion. I don't think that's the problem. The problem, and the fact that they can be tough, is proven by how tough they are in negotiating with their domestic political opponents.
Yeah, the toughness seems reserved for that, though, I must say.
Yeah, no, but I really think it's important to understand that it's not a lack of negotiating skill that we saw in their approach to Iran. I think there was a strategic idea they had, a really bad strategic idea, in my opinion. But it was, the negotiations looked like they were being poorly negotiated because they were actually being motivated by I think, a completely misguided strategic idea. And the strategic idea that was motivating these talks was that if the United States changed its behavior and became friendlier, more modest, more cooperative with the Iranians, more apologetic toward the Iranians, that we could repair the damage in our relationship with Iran that President Obama believes the United States was responsible for over the decades, and that we could turn Iran from a hostile country into a cooperative and, in time, friendly country, and that we could move from confrontation to cooperation and joint projects with Iran. And I think that's the reason that we made concession after concession. It's not that President Obama is incapable of being hard-headed and tough. And if you look at the way he's dealt with the Republicans on Capitol Hill, he's been one of the most hard-headed and one of the toughest and one of the most kind of ruthless negotiators that we've ever had as president.
No, it's true. And it's a very fair point, and I want to develop a little further after the break. This is really the crux of the issue, is what has come about as a result of this misguided policy approach towards the Iranians. When we come back, the former Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Douglas J. Feith, will talk with us about some of the particulars of this deal that make it not only defective in myriad ways, but downright dangerous for folks like us. That and more, straight ahead.